It's the Brad and John Show.
It is the Brad and John Show. Today's date is May 9th. It's a Friday, my favorite day of the entire week. And John, you know what I missed yesterday, which was a very important day in history, which I forgot to talk about?
I know. I can't believe you didn't kvetch about state offices being closed for Truman Day.
Was Truman Day yesterday?
Yeah, I can't believe you didn't complain about it.
No, that wasn't what I was talking about. Yesterday was the 80th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day.
Oh, yeah. You know, I saw some tweets about that and like how Trump was going to rename it something else.
Yeah, 80th anniversary. And my father, who was, I believe, at this point in World War II, my father was still in France. He was moving from France into Germany. He might have been in Germany at this point in time. And after essentially the Russians had a big celebration yesterday in Red Square because we were coming from the west, they were coming from the east, and there was a battle as to who would get to Berlin first. And the Russians wanted to take Hitler alive, and if you know the whole story, he went down his bunker and shot himself in the head. But that's a whole other story. And probably not too long after that, my father headed west. I believe he got on a troop ship someplace in France or someplace like that. And it was probably a month after, probably would have been sometime in June. And then he was headed for Japan. And I believe he went through the Panama Canal. You know, it's sort of sad, some of the history of my father in World War II. My mom interviewed him one time and wrote all this stuff down. And I can't remember what I did with the piece of paper. It really drives me nuts. Actually, she typed it out, and it was amazing. I mean, here was my dad, like a young man who, by the time he was 25, he'd been in battle for 3 years and been in I don't know how many countries and been around the world and stuff like that. And nowadays, you got people that, what do the kids do? The young guys. There was a thing I heard the other day that Mike Rowe talked about this. You know Mike Rowe, the Dirty Jobs guy?
Yeah, the Dirty Jobs guy, sure.
He said that we have a record number of working our able-bodied men, essentially between the ages of I think he said 18 to 54. There's now a record number of 18 to 54-year-old men who could be employed, but they're not. They don't have a job.
Yeah, why should they be?
Well, maybe they're sort of like my youngest son who loves Bernie Sanders because he keeps saying if Bernie becomes president, he's going to quit his job because Bernie will take care of him. Bernie will give him health care. Bernie will do this. Bernie do that. Okay. If I play something off of YouTube, even though this is from another radio station, once it's on YouTube, it's public domain, correct? Isn't that the way it works?
Yeah, I believe so, sure.
Okay. I'm going to play, if I can get my phone to work here, I'm going to play something. And you're going to be able to hear this. And I want your reactions to this, okay? And
sure.
What's interesting about this is going to be, if I can find it here, this is going to be one of your buddies. And you still are good friends with him. He doesn't like me anymore. So anyway.
Oh, this will be great. This is the Friday edition of Brad's Imaginary Beefs.
Okay, you ready? Here we go.
I'm ready.
A little less than 5 years ago, Tishaura Jones, Cori Bush, and Kim Gardner were at the St. Louis Arch celebrating their victories in the August primary elections. And for people like Jones, the results from the St. Louis region's voters spoke volumes about how they trusted black women to lead them.
They can throw whatever they can at you, and you can still come out on top because people believe the truth.
But flash forward to today, and Bush, Jones, and Gardner are all gone from public life. Jones says that this trend showcases some troubling signs about the region's voting patterns.
There is a reckoning that needs to happen, especially when it comes to the leadership of black women in the Democratic Party and in the progressive movement. They want our votes, but they don't want our leadership. And we need to have a serious conversation and a hard conversation as to why.
So what do you think of Jones's comments? And why do you think that black women throughout the St. Louis region have had trouble maintaining their electoral posts? Either send me a message to this email address or comment down below, and we may use your sentiments in a future story.
Jason Rosenbaum at stlpr.org. Okay, John, he asks the question, What do you think? And the three parties in question are Cori Bush, Tishaura Jones, and Kim Gardner. What do they all three have in common? There's a couple things they have in common.
Yeah, they have lack of execution. I think they have all three had signs of perceived corruption. I think that's on a spectrum. I think that, yeah, I mean, I don't know how many people would put, Tishaura Jones in the same bucket as spending taxpayer money as Cori Bush, but some people probably would. I would say malfeasance in office. And in Cori Bush's case, I think it would have to do with not performing the duties of her office, like I think you could say about a Kim Gardner or a Tishaura Jones, but it's being out of touch with the region. When you pick fights with Boeing, when you pick fights with the Jewish community and others. And I should also point out, Brad, as we get back to this topic, we discussed this in A Block yesterday, and we also discussed it in B Block yesterday. Tishaura's interview that Jason and Rachel Lippman did. I was incorrect about something yesterday, and a listener pointed this out. And this listener said, hey, your initial gut instinct was correct. When Tishaura Jones made a comment about not having a driver anymore, she was joking. And this listener sent me the clip, the actual clip, and I listened to it. And Tishaura Jones was joking and was being sarcastic about no longer having a driver. So I stand corrected. I read the quote that was in the St. Louis Public Radio story without context. I noted on the air with you that it was without context, and maybe Tishaura was just joking. And it turns out she actually was joking. So I do want to correct myself on that, Brad.
Well, John, here's the thing that bothers me about this whole situation. All three of them are going to say, we're black females, and this is why we're not in office anymore. And I'm thinking to myself, if they were white dudes, I'd feel the same way about him. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. But again, Brad, it's a convenient excuse. And I mean, what do you expect Tishaura to do? Say, I failed to execute. I put people who were incompetent in positions of power. I didn't pay close enough attention to the people I appointed. Would you expect her to take responsibility? Or would you expect her to play a very convenient race card?
You know, it's so frustrating to me that, and I've done this for a while. I guess it was about a year and a half. I read this interesting article, and this guy essentially said, you need to essentially take comeuppance for everything in your life. And he says, the most powerful words you can say are three words. It's my fault.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of that over the last year and a half since I read that, and to the point where it's interesting because sometimes when I've said to people in personal and business things, hey, it's my fault, I'm sorry, it's amazing. People go like, really?
Because it's disarming, yeah. And a lot of times when people apologize, it's actually about them, and it's a selfish act on their part to absolve themselves of responsibility. When you do it, I believe you're actually taking responsibility, though, Brad.
Well, but isn't that what a true leader does? Doesn't a true...
Yeah, of course it is, Brad. But also, let me play devil's advocate for Tishaura. Tishaura is probably, I mean, I can't say probably, I'm going to say about 100% never going to run for anything again. So why can't she go Sherman's March to the Sea? Why can't she go Scorched Earth and say, hey, y'all are racist. That's why I lost. She doesn't have to come back to white St. Louis City voters again and ask and beg them for their vote. So to heck with them. She doesn't need white progressive women in Tower Grove anymore. So to hell with them.
Well, the thing that bothers me is maybe Tishaura is not the worst of the three, but when you put Kim Gardner and Cori Bush in that equation, I mean, everybody knows the Kim Gardner situation. You know, I mean, she outright should have been disbarred for things she did. You know, and she's going to nursing school while she's on the payroll. The St. Louis prosecutors, you know, she's the chief prosecutor, the PA, DA, whatever they call it in the St. Louis City. She's the PA in the city, isn't it?
Yeah, whatever it is.
Prosecuting attorney. Okay, she's essentially bilking the taxpayers.
The circuit attorney.
Circuit attorney. She's bilking the taxpayers by attending college classes to further her nursing career, which I don't understand. If you got a JD degree, why do you want to get a nursing degree? But that's a whole nother story.
Maybe because you don't want to do hard work as an attorney, Brad. Maybe that's why.
I guess. I don't know. And the Cori Bush thing. I remember hearing Bob Onder talking about this on 93.7 or I can't remember. Maybe he was on, I don't know what station he was on, but he was talking about the fact that Cori Bush would not talk to any Republicans on the Capitol Hill. I'm going like, how in the world can you do that? How in the world can, I mean, I get the fact that it's like us versus them and they're the enemy kind. I tell the story all the time about Robert Hyland, the guy who used to run KMOX, that, if you were a KMOX employee and if you were seen at a restaurant, especially if you were having drinks with a person from another radio station, that was grounds for termination. I'm going, okay, whatever. I just don't get the whole thing. I mean,
here's what I think, Brad. Go ahead, Brad. Finish your thought.
Well, the thing with Kim Gardner, she's probably the worst offender. They've nailed her so many times. She hired the FBI dude. Who knows what was going on with that? All sorts of crazy stuff. And talking about a witch hunt, I mean, there's so many parallels between Eric Greitens and Donald Trump. There's just so many incredible parallels that you're seeing them play out right now. The only difference is that Trump's getting his comeuppance with Letitia James, but that's a whole nother story. But, anybody... Cast race aside, cast sex aside, gender, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it was obvious she was in she was in over her ears. You know what I mean? She was incompetent for that job. That's all there was to it.
Yeah, but she got elected, and people get the government that they deserve, and the people chose Kim Gardner. It also speaks to the quality of people who run for office in St. Louis City. I mean, it's not like they're working with an entire class of WashU law grads, Brad. They're working with people who've already made a decision to live in the city. So I think we know what that says about their judgment. And again, my favorite quote from Tishaura yesterday, or that was in the piece yesterday, was she said that there is, quote, I would say an unhealthy and unrealistic level of expectation when it comes to Black female leadership. In other words, people expect too much from Black females. Well, what's funny about that, Brad, is I remember KSDK and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and other news outlets in 2020 and 2021 talking about Black girl magic. And you can't have it both ways. You can't say that you as a Black woman are inherently magical and you have some sort of magical properties that, mediocre white men don't have. And then on the other hand, say, whoa, y'all got too high expectations for us. So pick one and stick to it.
Okay, couple last minutes of this block. I have a suggestion. Matter of fact, not a suggestion. I say there's someone that should be arrested and thrown in jail. And you know who that is?
Tracy Ellis.
No. I say it's Jill Biden.
Oh, I heard about the View interview. I didn't watch it, but I read about it, Brad.
There comes a time when you have a couple that's been married for a long time. There comes a time when the wife needs to have a serious talk with her husband and say, honey, you've got some issues. We just need to have you sort of step back. You need to enjoy the rest of your life and not parade this poor man around and make a fool out of him any more than he's been made a fool out of. You know what I'm saying?
I get exactly what you're saying. Yeah, what I don't understand about this. What upside could there be from dragging the corpse that is Joe Biden onto the View? Like, is the idea that they're going to resuscitate his legacy, or like what's the best possible outcome from that?
Well, she answered most of the questions, and she's like, jumping in when he can't get the words out of his mouth. And I guess probably the most infamous quote from me was, if you remember the night of the debate, the debate that changed the entire election.
Yeah, right.
The night of the debate, remember they had a rally after that. And remember, I got to pull that audio. Do you remember what I'm talking about with Jill Biden's on stage?
Yeah, and she referred to the campaign as we, right?
Right. But more importantly, she says, he was so great. He was so wonderful. He answered every question.
Yeah. And he stood there looking like some sort of fuddy-duddy that had no idea where he was.
Right. And how can a wife see her husband be embarrassed on national television and then go to a rally and say, oh, my God, he was wonderful. He was great. He answered every question. Man.
I think she probably just views that as loyalty. Now, we don't know the conversations that she had privately. I think we can assume that she probably lied to him and said that he did fine and that it was time to go to bed and we'll talk about it tomorrow, Joe. But who knows? I mean, maybe she said, hey, Joe, you weren't at your best tonight. Maybe we'll talk about, I don't know. Of course, and as you pointed out many times, Brad, all indications are that she was, primary and trying to get him to stay in the race when people like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and other people were trying to talk sense to the Biden team.
Well, and remember the infamous cabinet meeting. He didn't have that many cabinet meetings when he was the president. Remember the one cabinet meeting where Jill's sitting at the head of the table and he goes, "Hey, you're in charge." I'm going like, we didn't elect her. Who is she? I mean, like, who was the president going back in history that had the heart attack or something like that? Was that Woodrow Wilson? That his wife? Remember this story? I have to pull up my history. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do remember this. In fact, I think
they had him.
I think I remember Rosenbaum talking about this actually.
Right, and the story was that he was in bad shape, and I think he ultimately died in office. I have to double check that, but. She would supposedly, nobody could come in and see him in his room, wherever he was, in the White House, I don't know where he was, hospital, whatever. Nobody could come in and talk to him. They had to talk to her. And they would say, okay, we need to talk to the president about that. And she would supposedly go in the room and discuss something with him. Then she'd come out and she'd say, okay, here's what he says we should do. When everybody knew that he couldn't even talk anymore and she was making the decisions. Get what I'm saying?
I do. Do you think that Kristi Noem will do this for you in a couple of years? Like, do you think if I need to confirm, hey, Brad, you were actually going to move that tower, right? And then she goes in and pretends that she talks to you and she's like, John, no, Brad said he's done climbing that transmitter. He did it for the last time. You think Kristi will do that for you?
No, because here's what Kristi will do, which will be much more appreciated for me. She'll take me out into a back area and she'll put a bullet in my head. That's what
I thought you were going to say she'd follow Dr. Oz's recommendation that had to do with the number 200.
No,
but
she'd
I don't know.
She'd put a bullet in my head and essentially say, okay, let's move on. And she
would treat you like a country dog, right?
Right, exactly. Okay, we have to take a break.